What is it that people are seeing? Is it a man? An animal? A myth? Or something else? Are they delusional? Are they lying? Some are pastors. Some are law enforcement. Some are military. If they are delusional liars, why do we trust them to lead us to God? To put people in jail and to protect our way of life? Why are their words and actions good enough for that? But when it comes to experiencing something out of the ordinary, something fascinating, something possibly terrifying, they become a fool, a joke, an idiot. Not here. We are the Big Dog T2B. Welcome to the show. Hello everyone, my name is Jack, and welcome to the Big Dog T2B. Tonight we have part 2 of our episode with Greg, and we really hope that you enjoyed episode 1. Part 1 has been up for less than 24 hours, and we have 8 comments and 31 likes. That is absolutely awesome. Thank you guys very much. I'm sorry if I mispronounced the names. We have comments from Christine Smith, Rex Goodrum, 80 Blocks, Jeremy Harrison, Michael Gordon, Hoosier Squatch. How you doing, Hoosier? We met in Land Between the Lakes last year. Bizzle A. And last but not least, and first on our comments, the Bat Mom. Thank you very much, Bat Mom. We also ask that you keep our brother, Jimmy Osmer, in your prayers as he recovers from a hospital stay. Please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment below. It helps us grow the channel. Also, you can visit us at www.bigdog, the letter T, the number 2, the letter B.com. You can also email me at gentlemanjack@bigdogt2b if you'd like to come on the show, or if you know someone that would like to come on the show. Well, enough with that. Let's hear more from Greg and the guys.
It's just strictly my opinion, but I believe that they're like any other creature on earth, that they have a comfort zone. And they may become comfortable with a situation that at one time they weren't used to, or something's new, but when they become comfortable with that, they deal with it, as best they can. And then you add another factor, that infringes on that comfort zone. And what I get from what Greg said, when he whooped at it, that disrupted what it always done, and things didn't go the way that it usually does. And it's okay, I need to go back over here and think about this a minute, because they usually don't do that. And, I think it's all maybe a little bit the autistic thing, but I think they become very comfortable over a period of time with things, because those nuisance sinks that I've dealt with for so long, me and my wife could go down there for a long time, and they didn't come out and really show it, but they didn't hide from us. They didn't make any effort to conceal the fact that they were there. I mean, they didn't come hang out with us, but and I could take somebody else down there, and they retreat, in my opinion, all the way back up into the very end of the sinks, and they stay there and allow us to do what we do, because they know we're going to leave. We're not there to stay, and they know when we leave, they can go back to doing what they do. And I think it's a lot about a comfort zone.
And another thing about that whoop,
Right.
that whoop was not a prey noise. That was not a noise of submission. I wouldn't have taken that personally as a noise of dominance. We whoop at each other. It's whoop, hey, I'm over here, come over here this way. So of all the noises you could have made, that whoop was the most neutral. It wasn't a dominance. It wasn't a, oh.
Correct.
It wasn't that. It wasn't a, oh my God, I'm
Correct.
going to die.
Yeah.
It wasn't that
Yeah.
noise. It was a noise of confidence without aggression.
Correct. If he had hauled off and done, a siren call, that, ah, and then ended it off with a, yeah, that would have gotten a different response. What he did was, whoop, that's sort of a, hey, I'm here, but everything's cool. And I think that was how it was taken. That he wasn't trying to be, he wasn't trying to show any dominance. He wasn't trying to show any threat. Just, hey, I'm here, I'm doing my thing, and everything's gonna be all right.
Well, basically, that's what I was trying to do in my mind. Was I wanted to let the stupid thing know, hey, I know what you are. I know where you're at. And, I'd been hearing them whoop back and forth to each other. And I thought, well, I'm going to just try to, that was one of the main things that I'd heard the very most of was them whooping. And I thought, well, I'm going to just, turn it around on them and see what happens if I whoop back and basically say, hey, I'm right here.
Now, I have gotten them PO'd at me before when they were whooping, softly as they were moving through an area. You'd hear them in there, whoop, and then in a few minutes you'd hear it again, and it'd be somewhere different. And I've done it. Well, they're thinking, well, who is that? What's that? It messes with them. And I've been yelled at by presumably the alpha when I've done that repeatedly when I had heard them out there. So again, you're sort of, you're messing with their communications. But what Greg did was he wasn't interrupting what they had going on. He was just saying, hey, I'm here, but everything's okay. So,
yep, agreed. So what can you tell us about this road crossing, Greg?
Oh, about the road crossing. Well, that was January the 29th of 2009, about 11:30 in the daytime. I was having to work. I used to have a job. I worked for a propane company and actually was a delivery driver to haul propane to people's houses. And it was really bad cold that day, and it was on a Saturday. And here in Alabama, back then, our deer season went out the last day of January. Well, I wasn't real happy because it was cold and they was making us have to come in and work on that, that day. And my wife, she was off and getting to go hunting with one of my cousins. I wasn't real happy about having to work. So, but anyway, I was making a delivery and was coming back down a 2-lane paved road, a real nice, a county road, and was coming around, and you come into part of the forest, and I came around. It's pretty desolate, the area that I was fixing to go into, but I came by a house and went about another probably 400 yards and kind of come around the curve and then over a hill. And when I went over this little hill or rise, there's a long straightaway. It's probably 250, 300 yards long, and then the road makes a sharp left. Well, and on each side of the road then, it was planted pine trees, and the pines were up probably 18, 20 feet high or so, maybe a little higher. And the sides of the road was grass, about maybe ankle high, and it was still then, even in the wintertime here, it was still some green in it. And from the roadway to where the pine trees was probably 35, 40 feet. So you had a pretty good clear spot on each side of the road. And the left side of the road was a power line right away. You had the road, and then you had a ditch, and then the power line, and they had bush hogged underneath that power line. So I had, I don't know, probably at least 100 feet or so on the left side of the road that was, clear ground. And as I topped that hill at the far end of that straightaway on the right-hand side, I see an upright figure step out of the tree line. It just steps out into the grass. Well, the first thing, I'm kind of daydreaming. I'm thinking how much more I got to get done before I get off work that day, trying to get done, but so I can go hunting that evening. Well, as I see this figure step out, it's like, a little bit of the shade of the trees where it steps out into that grass. And the first thing pops in my head is, here's some son of a gun hunting, and I'm having to work. Well, my brain felt like a VCR that you'd mash play and rewind and fast forward all at one time. It was like double clutching trying to catch a gear, because it's like, wait a minute, that's not somebody. Well, the thing steps out, and I'm looking at the profile, the left side of this thing, and when it steps out, I think, that's somebody hunting, and I'm having to work. Well, like within about a second, the thing's like its knees kind of bow out, and it like about halfway squats, and its whole upper body from the waist or pelvis area up turns, and it turns toward me. When it turns toward me, its arms, like its elbows, bow out, and it like, it's like real broad looking, and it just bows out, and it's like facing me. And the thing just like it stopped, and like we were having a 2-second stare down. Well, and it's like just the look of, oh crap, I'm caught. Well, the thing steps with its left foot to go back the way it came from, and as it steps, like brings that left foot toward the wood line, it's got a real wide stance with its feet, and it stops, and I see its body like sway, like it's weight transferred, and then it stops, and it's like, oh crap, I can make it. And the thing turns back, and as it pivots back toward the highway, it's like I can go ahead and make it across. And that thing takes, like, it jerks that left foot off the ground, and it takes a step and launches. And that thing, when it jumps, the roadway where that thing stepped out, the part, I say a ditch, it's not really a ditch, it's level ground there, but the road surface, you have to go up a 45-degree bank about maybe a little over 5 feet high. And from where this thing was at, going horizontal to the roadway, I would guess every bit of 20, 25 feet. This thing launches, that one step, it launches its body and goes flying through the air, and its foot lands on the pavement. This thing went 20, 25 feet to the left, to my left, and vertical, at least 5 feet vertical, and was in the road and taking strides across the highway. It launched from a dead stop that distance and landed in the road, ran across the road, and it didn't go straight across. It was going diagonal at an angle toward me, and it got to the other side of the road, and there is a ditch there. And then, like, the ditch is probably 6 or 7 feet from the edge of the pavement, and it's a little shallow ditch. And then the bank of the road, that's about probably a 2-foot elevation up to the power line right away. That thing looked like it barely extended its stride, and it covered probably, I would say, 15 feet. Just like its legs just spread a little further, and it like a step jump, and it launched and hit on where they had bush hogged under that power line right away. It hit on the ground over there, and it strided across that power line right away, and then went through some blackberry briars, and then went into the pine trees. Well, where it crossed under the power line right away, there was a power pole and a guying wire that went down to an anchor. And where they had bush hogged around that guy wire anchor, they had left a privet hedge. And that privet hedge went up and bushed out, and it ran between the privet hedge and the power pole. And it went, between me and the privet hedge. So I could see how close to the same height the privet hedge it was. And that thing, the best I could tell, like about a foot and a half, being as tall as the top limbs of the privet hedge. Well, I went back that evening. Me and my dad went back a few hours later, and we measured it, and the privet hedge was like 10 foot 2 inches or 10 foot 4 inches. So what I saw was at least 8.5 feet tall. And judging by the height, I'm going to say very close to 4 feet tall. 4 feet wide. So 8.5 feet tall, 4.5 feet wide. And massive. I'm talking about massive. I don't mean, a lot of people say, oh, they look like a basketball player, stretched out, lanky, like a real toned athlete, or they look like a bodybuilder. Now, I could see the muscles. I could see the thing was covered in jet black, ink-colored hair, and it was shiny. I'm talking about slicked off, shiny, reflective, shiny hair, if you've seen a Brahma bull that's slicked out and the coat on him real sheened off, and the sun hits it, and it like where the muscles are, it got a gray hue to it. The sun reflected off of it. That's what I saw.
It's like the ones that it's like you heard me talk about the ones out on our farm. They all look like they just came from the beauty shop.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This thing I'm talking about, it had a shine to it, and I could see the muscles flexing. I could see like the on its thigh. I could see the muscles bulge. I could see the biceps swell up when its arms were bent. I mean, it was amazing. It just, you can't explain it to somebody and do it justice, just how big and how bulky and huge these things are. This thing,
I have a question.
it didn't narrow in at the waist. It was like barrel shaped, plumb down to its butt. It had like a big rump on the thing. But guys, I would dare say that this thing's size was big as a trash can. I mean, massive. Its arms, you couldn't have cut the bottom out of a 5-gallon bucket and put over its bicep. It was huge.
I got a question.
Yeah.
It's actually two parts. How far was it at its furthest distance from you, and how far was it at its closest distance to you, and how long was the total sighting? 3 parts.
Okay. Well, when I came around the curve and topped the hill, as I crowned the top of the hill, that's when it stepped out. I was running about around 40 miles an hour, and I was going toward it. All right. The whole encounter, I would dare say, lasted 8 to 10 seconds. Probably somewhere in that neighborhood, because it stepped out. I looked at it a second or two. It like started to go back, started to cross, and then it whirled, jumped up in the road. And let me tell you something. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of deer running flat out, if not 1,000 deer running flat out. A deer wouldn't have had a prayer. There's no way a deer could have thought about outrunning that thing. Ain't no way. Couldn't happen. There's not an Olympic sprinter that's ever breathed could have thought about trying to outrun that thing. It went across the road so fast and across the right of way and through those briars. Guys, it looked like it wasn't real. I mean, as far as, it's like, how could something that big move that fast? It was amazing. And it was just, like I said, my brain was just running 1,000 miles an hour. And honestly, I done dealt with these things. Like I said, I started on this whole journey around 2000, 2001, somewhere in there. I done been putting up with them for 8 years at this point. And I was already to the point of, I was waiting on that last little bit of assurance that that's what this is. And guys, maybe you have to bleep this out, but I'm going to say what I said verbatim. I was holding the steering wheel and had pulled my body up to the steering wheel as close as I could get to the windshield. And I was screaming at the windshield, going, I see you, you son of a bitch, I see you. And I kept repeating that over and over. And guys, I was screaming it at the windshield. because I had confirmation. Without a doubt, I knew that I was right all along. That's what it was.
Okay, how close did you get to it?
I would say that I was probably, by the time it hit the woods, I was probably 100 yards.
Okay, excuse me. Okay, I've run this exercise with a few people off air. This is the first time I'm gonna do it on air. I'm gonna say start, and when I say start, you start playing the movie in your head, and when the movie's over, you tell me to stop, and I'm gonna time it. You good with that?
Sure.
Okay. Start.
Stop.
Now you're pretty close. 7.34
Fine,
seconds. 7.34 seconds. And that's a long time. When you say 7 seconds to somebody, they're like, oh, that's really quick until you listen to that, until you pay attention to that length of time in silence. And how did you get all
I'll tell
that,
you what.
how did you get all that information in 7 seconds? 7 seconds is actually a long time when you listen to it in silence to say how much could I recognize during that period. So thank you for letting me do that on
Tell
here.
you what, I'll tell you what, Jack. If you don't care, let me do something, and we'll go back to it. What I just ran through in my head, and you time this till I'll say okay at the end, and you see what the time difference is, and I'm gonna try to talk it out loud what I saw, and like that, and we'll see how bad it misses. You want to try that?
Absolutely. I'll tell you when to start. Start.
Step out, face me, step back, whirl, jump up the bank, cross the road, jump the ditch, power line right away, briars, gone, okay.
That's almost twice that. That's actually more than twice that. It's 16.17 seconds.
Oh, wow.
Did this take place anywhere close to, and I don't want you to give me the location, but our mutual friend that that I asked you about pretty regularly, the old guy, he says there's a place down there not far from you that most any given night, close to a bridge, you can see a road crossing. Oh.
I'm trying now. Wait a minute. Is like old guys in?
Yeah.
Hold on just a second. I'll edit out that part so we don't give the location away. All right. Now that you got that out of the way.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Right,
I know.
now that you got that out of the way, go ahead and say whether or not you guys are on the same location.
Okay. Our mutual friend. Yes, sir. Anyway, yes. As far as close, Nate, where I used to hunt from, where I've had 98% of my encounters, from where he was telling you about the bridge. They, okay, you remember where we went that night and they kept shutting the peepers up? The frogs kept hushing up on us?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Down there's where my hunting land was. If you came back out to the pavement, you're on top of the hill above that bridge. I'm talking about where I had so many encounters would be 1.5 mile crow fly from the bridge, and where I had this daytime sighting would have been crow fly about 2 miles north of there through the woods. There's actually where that bridge is, there's what I call a river. There's another small creek that comes in right by that bridge. And if you and I walked to where I saw that one, the daytime sighting, one I just told you about, if we come out of the road on the side that this thing ran into, if we went in the woods where that thing went in, any bit of rain that falls right there runs down into the branches and runs into this creek that comes out at that bridge, and it's about 2 miles.
You know, he told me down there that any given night, if you drive down across that bridge in that section of road there, you were subject to see a road crossing. And I believe most of what he said. I took the guy being legit. I think he's a cut up, but I think he's legit.
Well, I was just gonna say, Nate, you remember me telling you that I spent a weekend down there here about a month ago?
Yeah.
What I was gonna say, I was out on Greg's property, and I heard some calls over there across the river and up that creek he's talking about. Me and my boy paddled his canoe up in that creek and fished up in there. And I was down there, out there at night, walking my dogs, and I heard calls coming from up in that creek watershed. So they're in there for sure.
There is a guy that I talked with on the phone back last year, I guess, and I talked with Greg shortly after. And you know me, I'm a field researcher, have been since I was 17 years old. I beat the bushes, and I'm bad about going by myself. But this was a young guy, and he's from over there. And I remember his first name, but I'm not going to mention it. But he was talking about kayaking down that creek by himself at night. And of course, I suggested against it. I'm bad about do as I say do, don't do as I do. But this kid, he seemed more curious than knowledgeable, and I didn't think it was a good idea just based on what we experienced that night when we stopped with the frogs. They're there. They're definitely there. And then on what the old guy says, I told him I didn't think that was a place he needed to go by himself.
Where we had the deal with the frogs and up in that creek he's talking about, where I think those calls were coming from, wasn't more than 300-400 yards through the woods. You don't need to be messing around up in there at night by yourself.
There's a lot of things you don't need to do if you're not a war-hardened veteran of things going wrong. So I got a question.
What?
Greg, were you with us in LBL on the bridge the night that we got that call?
Now the main howl call y'all got the day before Troy and I got there. We went out the next night, I think.
You were there the next night.
Yeah.
Tim, can you tell us a little bit about that call?
Yeah. We went to, I had been wanting, this is an area that I like to go to, but I haven't been there every outing that we've had in LBL. And I was looking forward to going there this time because it was the same time of year as a really good full body sighting that we had in this area. And it's on an old bridge. And we had, this is years and years ago. This is back around 2000, 2001, somewhere around in there. We'd driven out on this bridge and just stopped because it gave you a little bit of a buffer zone right there where things couldn't get up too terribly close to you without you seeing them or hearing them easily. And I had made a couple of calls, and we got an answer, and we could hear the thing coming through the woods. And there was enough of a moon. As we saw it, it came right out in the road. And we had a person in our group that at that time was so bad wanting to have an up close encounter with one of these things that this person took off running towards it just as hard as they could go. And myself and another gentleman were yelling at this person to stop, come back here, stop. And we ended up having to take off running. And, I was 20 something years younger then, and I was in a lot better physical shape than I am now. And I was able to run this person down and catch them. And I got a hold of one arm, and the person was still trying to drag me towards the booger, who was still standing in the road and doing some of those same huffs and um, and and calls and growling and stuff like what Greg described earlier. And fortunately, the second person got there and got a hold of the person's other arm, and we were able to stop the person and turn them around, and at their protest, get them away. And right as we turned the person around, I looked back over my shoulder to see what the booger was doing, and it turned around. It made exactly that sort of disgusted huff, and it turned around and walked back into the woods from whence it had came, from the direction it had come from. And we didn't hear it go walking off, so we knew it was close by. But we hung around there for a while, but there was no other activity, and we eventually left. So here we are in Jack. Was that this past April?
It hadn't warmed all the way up yet. It was pretty cool at night.
Right. So March or April, and 20 years later, 21 years later, we go back to the same place. And this is not, like I said before, it's not my first time back there since that incident happened. But it was my first time back there in 3 or 4 years, probably. And so we pull up in exactly the same place. And we got out and we just listened for a while and talked very quietly amongst ourselves. And everybody was listening. And we had one of the members of our group had a really good recorder going, and it was a good stereo recorder. He wanted, rather than having the two microphones attached to the actual recorder body himself, he wanted to have good separation of the microphones. So he was holding one mic in each hand and was holding them out to his sides, pointed sort of away from his body, each one of them at about a 45-degree angle. So they were actually pointed about 90 to 100 degrees away from each other. So after we'd been there, 15, 20 minutes, I decided to make my first call. And instantly, to our southwest, we got an answer of a very loud, started out very low pitched, growled quickly into a howl. It was so loud that when it first started off, I felt a small amount of reverberation in my body. And it, like I said, it went into a rising pitch howl. And then it ended that and started right into another one. And then some coyotes not too far away started howling. And another one of the low-pitched ones started on beyond the first one. And then we started hearing another one of the low-pitched howls start up in the exact 180-degree opposite direction from it as far as we were concerned, back to the northeast of us. Now, it was further away. It sounded like it was probably a half a mile away. This went on, the closer one, and the one that was just past it, probably another 50, with up there close to it, within a 50 or to 100 yards, but beyond it. And the one behind us, this went on for, I can't remember, Jack, what, about 15, 20 seconds? And the coyotes were going crazy as well. But when we played the recording back later, you could clearly differentiate between the coyotes and this other thing that was making these howls and screams, or howls. But the scary thing was that we realized that this one that was behind us to the northeast was quickly moving closer to us. And the howling and stuff went on for, I don't know, 20 seconds or so, maybe a little bit more. And then it just stopped. The coyotes went on for a little bit longer and then faded out. But it was everybody there, their hair was standing up. But I had never heard a howl like this, so loud and so close. So we did a lot of analysis of it. Unfortunately, the recording was made in an MP3 format rather than a WAV format or a RAW format. So it cut out all of the wavelengths below 30 to 35 hertz. It didn't get any of the really low frequency stuff right at the beginning of it. But the really weird thing about it, we ran it through spectrum analyzers and did a lot of analysis on it. This contained sounds, the howls. We were able to isolate the howls before the coyotes started up. The howls contained bandwidths, contained significant acoustic energy in 9 different type bandwidths. It was almost like we were looking at some kind of a composite of something. None of us have ever ever heard anything like that before, and we've never seen it. I have been running audio files through spectrum analyzers since back around 1980, 81. And I've never seen anything like this. I think that there's a possibility that was not Bigfoot related, that we could have actually captured a dogman howl. Possibly. I don't know, since I've never recorded anything before. Well, I take that back. I have recorded one thing before that I thought was a dogman. But I will say this. This area, this place where we were recording, was over 20 miles away from any dogman activity that I know of in the LBL area. Go ahead, Jack.
It was significant enough that just after the second howl subsided, Coonbo stepped back over to me on the bridge and asked, he said, "Are you armed?" I said, "Yes, sir." And
yeah,
it's one of those things. And, for me, having never seen the thing, I couldn't put a tag on that thing for anything I know of in North America. If you took something like Big Wolf and you added tones from an elk and maybe a little lion, and you put all of those sounds kind of together over the course of the range of the thing, that's kind of what you had.
Okay, I wanted to, something I forgot to add.
Go ahead.
What we did is we did some very careful triangulation on this. And the fact that we had 2 microphones out of there pointed in different directions, a good 5 to 6 feet apart, we were able to after everybody, I talked to everybody that was there, and asked them, you know, what direction were they hearing it coming from, and that, and we're looking at maps of this area, photo, uh, satellite views of this area, and we all agreed on where we were hearing the different calls coming from, and then I did some figuring based on the microphones, and pretty much determined that these calls were coming from around 400 yards away. The initial call, and that the second call that started up in the same area was probably 50 to 75 yards on beyond that, and that the one behind us was coming from probably a half a mile away. And to conceive of the sound energy that was hitting us from that distance away through the woods and then across about 60 yards or so of water, I mean, it's pretty amazing. I know sound carries very well over the water. Interesting thing, we have some friends that are researchers in that area that have been in there quite a bit as well. And I was telling them about this, and and was telling them about the area where we were, and they started telling me about some crap that had happened to them. And once we figured out where it was coming from, it was right in there where they had some hair-raising encounters in the past. So this area has a history.
I know one thing, that's the creepiest place I've probably been in a long, long, long time. I remember that for sure. Yeah, that, that kind of wished I could have heard that, what y'all heard that first night. But, just, man, I'll tell you, dude, that is an odd, strange place up there at the LBL.
So did you have any other encounters up there around your hunting property?
Me? I could sit here for the next 2 days and talk solid about things that's happened to us up here. That's the thing about what I've tried to explain to people, till I got hooked up with Tim and Nate, and Troy and Jim, and guys, I've never been a researcher, and I still don't classify myself as a researcher. I classify myself as a redneck that loves the outdoors. It just happens to do most of my outdoor activities somewhere that's inhabited by these things. We just kind of coexist on the same property and occasionally run up on one another. There's not a year went by in the last 20 years or so, I'd say, 18 to 20 years, that I hadn't had numerous encounters. It is. And I've had so much stuff happen that, I've heard all kind of things, everything from sound like little kids crying to last year. Last year I heard, and I've heard this more than once, but it sounds like kids playing. And you're, like where I was at last year in the woods, I was probably close to through the woods, 3/4 of a mile from another road or from a house. And I was in there right before dark. I start hearing sounds like, and this isn't a pine thicket next to this field that I was hunting in. This is a different piece of property, but these pieces of property from the one I was telling you about earlier is only a half a mile apart. And this one of them's on the other side of the river. The initial 40 acres of land that I hunted originally, my cousin wound up selling it. And I begged him for several years to sell me that piece of property, and he wouldn't do it. He owned a lot of land in this county that I live in. And he had that 40 acres, and like I said, we'd hunted it for years, and I kept hounding him about selling it to me. Sell it to me. Well, he wouldn't do it. Well, next thing I know, after several years, he tells me one day, he said, son, come by, I want to talk to you. I said, well, okay. Well, I went by. He said, well, you ain't going to get to hunt that no more. I said, what? He said, well, I reckon I got it sold. And I just kind of dropped my head. I said, well, okay. I said, when are they buying it? He said, well, if everything goes good, in probably about 2 weeks, I'll have my money. Well, I didn't really say anything about it. And he could tell I was pretty disgusted and kind of upset. Well, I wasn't really upset. I was more disheartened than anything, I guess you'd say. But I asked him, he called me a few days later. He said, come by, I want to talk to you. I said, okay. So I went by his house. Well, he just lived from where we went off the road to go into this property. It wasn't but just about another probably 2 miles to his house. He said, come by, I want to talk to you. So I got something that's bothering me. I said, well, okay. So I went by and sat down in there in his den with him. I said, what's up? He said, you mad at me? I said, I don't reckon I'm mad at you. Why would I be mad at you? He said, well, I sold that property, and he said, you've been hounding me for a few years to sell it to you. I said, well, I ain't mad at you. I said, I'm kind of heartbroken. He said, well, son, I couldn't sell that to you. I said, well, what do you mean you couldn't sell it to me? He said, well, you know, my health's bad. And he said, I'm getting on up in years, but I don't know how many more years I got. And he said, all that stuff y'all had go on down there, you and your daddy and Al, he said, I couldn't leave this old world and be worried that something was going to happen to you. He said, I've been worried this whole time that them things was going to hurt y'all. I said, well, they ain't hurt me yet. He said, well, that's true, but still, he said, I couldn't, in good faith, he said, I couldn't stand. He said, I couldn't tell you not to hunt it. He said, I just didn't have it in me to tell you not to hunt it. He said, but every day, he said, you know, I always make you call me when you're going down there and when you're leaving. I said, well, yeah, I just always call you and talk to you. He said, well, he said, every day you was in there, he said, I'd pray that y'all was going to be okay and them things wasn't going to hurt you. And he said, in good faith, he said, I just couldn't. He said, I couldn't go to my grave knowing that you was still going to be hunting that. So he sold it. He wouldn't let me buy that land from him because he was worried about me and my daddy and Alan hunting down there. But he never would tell us not to hunt it. But he wasn't going to die and knowing that I was just going to have that property and hunt it from now on. Which it wound up, it didn't really matter a whole lot because he left it in his will. There's 300 acres across the lake that's only, like I said, it's probably less than 3/4 of a mile from the field I hunt over there to where those fields was. But anyway, last year when I was in my stand right before dark, there's a pine thicket, and that pine thicket is super growed up and thick, and the trees are now probably 30 feet tall, a lot of underbrush. I'm sitting in my stand, and I'm about 150 yards from the wood line. Everything's quiet, and I'd seen some deer that evening, but they was about 300-400 yards away, and it was nothing I wanted to shoot. But as I sat there, kind of over my left shoulder, up in that pine thicket, I start hearing sounds like kids giggling, and it would giggle just like and then you'd hear one laugh like ah, and laugh out loud, and then it stopped, and then here in just a minute, it would be another kid giggle. And it would be like two of them giggle, and both of them would laugh. And this goes on for probably 10 minutes. And they'd get quiet for a minute or two, and they'd cut loose and go to giggling and laughing again. And you're talking about something that'll make you a little edgy. Before it got black dark, I came out and just started easing across the field to the truck. I got in the truck and left. And matter of fact, I called Troy that night and told him, I said, and Troy's a good friend of ours and fellow researcher and probably knows about much or probably forgot more than most researchers ever know. But anyway, I told him, I said, well, I heard the Boogerman's kids playing tonight. He's like, what'd you hear? And I told him, he said, yeah. He said, they're up there playing. I'll guarantee that's what it was. I went in the next morning and hunted the same stand. Got in there and Saw a couple of deer early that morning. They were across this field, and this field's about 24 acres. It's a big hay field, and so it's the field's probably average 200 yards wide, and it's about 780 yards long. And my stand's kind of in the middle on a power pole. But anyway, I sat there and I came out about 9 a.m. that morning. I was walking back toward the corner, kind of where my truck was. And as I got to where I walked out of the field, kind of down a hill, I parked my truck about, I don't know, about 30 yards from coming in the field. You can't see it from the field. I got about 40, 50 yards from the corner. So that put that pine thicket where I heard the giggling the night before to my right. Well, out in that pine thicket, about 40 yards, no more than 40 yards from the edge of the field, down low. I'm talking about it wasn't up in a tree. It was coming from, like, I'd say head high. There is the most crudest, horrible sounding imitation of an owl hooting that I've ever heard. It sounded like somebody that had the sore throat and croup and everything else, and it's going hoo 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 hoo, and it's just over and over and over. And I just stopped, and like I said, I'm 35, 40 yards from going out of the field with the truck, so I just stopped, and I'm standing out in this field, the grass is ankle high, and I just stop and I turn and I face where the hooting's coming from. Well, I just stand there a minute, and then it goes back to this horrible, terrible sounding hoot again. And when it does that. Well, I've got my rifle in my right hand, and it's kind of cradled in my left elbow. I've got my arm kind of folded up on my chest, and I'm just walking, my barrel pointing out to the left side. I just take my left hand and I raise it up about head level, and I just wave it real slow, kind of like my fingers together and my thumb all flat-handed. I just wave like 4 or 5 times, like an exaggerated wave. And I just fold my hand back on my chest, and I just stand there. Well, that thing, hoo, 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 hoo. And I just kind of closed mouth, smile, turn. I walk to the truck, get in the truck, and leave. And, I just really felt like that thing was letting the others know, hey, here he comes. He's coming this way. I don't know where he's going, but here he comes. I got in the truck and left. But I flat heard those kids. Now you tell me, on a, say, early November-ish, it's hunting season, they would have had to been poaching if or trespassing on this property. They're 3/4 of a mile from a road or a house to get in there where I'm at. Who's going to sound like, 7, 8-year-old kids or 5, 6-year-old kids, and there's at least 2 of them, and they're in this growed up pine thicket in the middle of nowhere, and it's about mid 20-something degrees, and it's right at dark. I mean, it would be astronomical that there were human children out there playing in this pine thicket.
Greg, you ever heard the coyote laugh? The hyena laugh down there, the kind of a laugh down there.
That's kind of what you just done, is a lot like what the laughter was. But it was a laughter, but it was a full blown, like a giggle sound, and it would last for several seconds, and then this laugh would kick off. But it sounded like kids giggling and then laughing.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard them do that before. Not very often, but I have heard it.
Yeah, but for me, the most out of all the stuff I've heard, and I'll have to go in. I don't know if we have time for it on what I call my motorcycle adventure. When there was one got really mad about a guy up on the highway revving up a motorcycle, and bar none, that's the most scared I've ever been. And that's a pretty long story, so we may have to tell that another time or whatever. But like Tim mentioned a while ago, the samurai chatter. I have heard the samurai chatter right here at the first 40-acre spot, the lower field that I was telling you about. Within 30 yards of me, I have heard two of these things communicate back and forth. And now that was a life altering experience when I heard these two things communicating back and forth, and it was like a language that I could not decipher nothing of, and it was low and loud, just real deep, but it was two voices. It would be like I was listening to a telephone conversation, or like listening to y'all talk back and forth. I could tell the difference in the voices, but I know there was two of them. I heard the first one walk up, and then after a few minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, I heard the other one walking, coming from the same direction. And it was that day, I think I kind of unwillingly or unknowingly outsmarted them. I had hunted that stand. It was in bow season, first part of bow season, and I'd hunted that stand 3 days in a row, and for all 3 days in a row, right before dark, there was a real good 8-point would come out on the bottom end of this field. It was about 80 yards from my stand. Well, I was hunting with a crossbow. 80 yard shot, no go. Couldn't, I'm not going to try even attempt 80 yards even with a crossbow. This was probably a 120-inch deer. He was a nice 8-point. Well, he would come out in the bottom part of this field. He'd step out, look around, and he'd turn around and leave. He done that 3 days in a row, the same exact thing within, give or take, 15 minutes. Well, I thought, oh boy, day number 4 is going to be a win for me. Instead of me getting in that ladder stand, I'm going to get closer to halfway down the field, and where the road that went on out of the field to the river, right there in the fork of that, there was where the field kind of peeled back to the right and that road went out to the left, there was a white oak tree that lightning had hit and the top had fell out of it. So there's this big pile of brush and limbs and stuff right at the base of this tree. Well, that day when I got there a little early. I went in about 2 o'clock, and it's bow season, so it's not getting dark till on 6-ish or so. So I had, say, 4 hours before it got dark. Well, I wind up, I go in there and I told a little bitty foldings. Bow season, you don't have to have hunter's orange. I'm full Realtree camo, head to toe, face mask, everything. I go in there and I even take a set of little pruning snips, and I cut some little old saplings off, some little pine boughs and stuff, and I shove them into these limbs around me, and I rake out a real clean spot that's at the base of this white oak where I can set my stool and my feet are on this fresh dirt. I raked a little clear path where I could walk in and out of that, which was only about maybe 8 or 10 feet back into the grass. So I'm just barely out of the field, just behind all these limbs and stuff. Well, I'm sitting there, and even the stool I was on was a little short stool. It wasn't probably 14 inches off the ground, maybe, if not, it probably wasn't that high. It was a short, like a low seat stool. Well, I'm sitting there, and I'm turned where I'm concentrating on that corner of the field. Well, about, I don't know, 30 minutes or 45 minutes before dark, across the field, and this field's narrow, it's about 30 yards across, maybe. But straight across from me, it's all hardwood around that side of the field, and there's like a little swag, and it's full of like cane, like just wild cane bushes, just river cane, we call it. And that stuff is just thick. Well, on out past that cane, I start hearing something walking, and it's bipedal, and it's heavy. It's coming through these oak leaves, hardwood leaves, and it's just steadily walking.
This concludes part 2 of our episode with Greg, and we look forward to seeing you in part 3. Please remember, if you decide to step off the pavement, if you decide to step off the trail, and get back into places where people normally don't go, you need to be mentally, physically, and emotionally prepared for what you may encounter. Take care. God bless. We love you. And until next time, have a great day.